Hello. So is that one thing that I learned in the past years is that communication is very important for an open source project. And therefore, I want to start this talk saying, I'm sorry if I misleaded you, saying that I wouldn't give you all the open source faces. This is just not possible. What I will bring you is a personal perspective from someone who has been involved in open source communities in both Brazil, Mexico, and Berlin for the past 13 years or so. Open source has always been for me a contradiction, just like life. What I like to define as a possible utopia, a real possibility of changing the access, where access and collective and collaborative construction could elevate the base, to quote Pedro Medeiros, whom I will bring in a few. By base, I mean the 99% who live in asymmetric and underprivileged conditions. A question, is this how you see open source too? You have probably heard about the historical difference between definitions of free software and open software, where the former, the free, is loaded with lots of idealism, and the later makes room for the incorporation of the model into business. That generates lots of polemic and gossips in between the world of open source. But in the end, both will guarantee the use, modification, and the distribution of the creations by legally offering open licenses. What I will do here today, it's kind of a mix, a little bit of both views, so bear with me. This conversation is an attempt to find, or better saying, to search for more sustainable and ethical models within this large ecosystem that open source has become. I am offering you a broader perspective about what that can be and applied. For that, I will give you fragments and a repertoire so you can have your own ideas and propositions about it. So let's make a historical journey through my personal history and talk about openness in culture, in government, in science, in knowledge, in medicine, and in business. And I will do that in a collaborative way. I ask important people that shape me and I interview them, especially for this talk, to share with you. Pixel. The seed of collective doing was introduced to me, Paloma, via culture. I come from a background in the art field and I consider myself really, really a lucky person, as my passage to adulthood in Brazil was under the management of FOSS, Free Open Source Software Advocates. And I can say that I am fruit of this public policies, of social empowerment and a push for change, transparency and openness. What was driving politics at the time was in line with the idea of FOSS, basically in three pillars. First, government money should be used for public good, not to benefit private stuff. Therefore, public money should serve and belong to everyone, as opposed to paying for a license for a certain time. That served well into open source software ideas, because you can own the system, not just a license. The second is about transparency. A computer, and computer was just the first idea. Now we can take this idea to other places. But if it held in government data, it has to be 100% auditable, which is not possible with something that is proprietary. The third is about collaboration. The way of building must be collective, collaborative. It must fit the need of the common. This was a direct response to the previous generation. Just as today, we are together trying to understand which kind of response we need to create in relation to the historical, political, and social moment we are living in. In Brazil, the beginning of 2000, the first decade of 2000 was marked by the rise of left in power after decades of military dictatorship. There was a lot of optimism, of economic growth, and a massive investment, both ideologically and financially, to literally eliminate misery, getting out of the hunger map. I'm taking about the basic needs that were not being met until then, and that unfortunately are back to exist today. The new government at the time was trying to equalize and repair historical class discrepancies and put Brazil as a power to get out of the under and become finally the developed country. Decentralization of cultural power was part of this plan. As in Brazil, the culture is centered in São Paulo, which is the main financial power, a little bit in Rio de Janeiro, but they're neighbor states, so it's kind of in the same space. Among these investments to change this policy was the work that was designed by Pixel, who was hired by the Ministry of Culture to design a scalable, user-friendly, inclusive program to teach educators and NGO professionals multimedia production in every corner of this country with the continental size using free software, so that these people could teach onwards and become a multiplier program. This program brought the idea of collaboration to those who only knew the commercial model, which is not the only one. And I quote Pixel, "Collaboration model is a collective intelligence, people together defining and executing the plan. Collaboration is many people doing what many people have defined." The changing model alone causes a huge fissure, as institutions like federal government tend to be cast in a bit hierarchical. But by default, including people in decision making is how the government should be, right? I do read, for me, that's a little bit more clear now that I live in Germany for the past 3 years. But democracy is something not that tangible in Brazil. Remember the context. We lived under a dictatorial regime for decades. It's still under militaries and the streets and laws of non-corruption. So democracy and participation, it's kind of not well grasped. Some of the results of the program Pixel managed was decentralization and diversification of culture, implementation and strengthening of pool of dissemination of free digital culture production through all over Brazil, the promotion and professionalization of cultural producers. And as cultural producers, I mean a wide range of possibilities. People who have inserted themselves into television, cinema, audiovisual, a strong culture of DJs and VJs and artists, which was my case. And I mean cool stuff like video mapping, creative coding, creative electronics. Access, collaborative, and collective making have influenced my artistic production and brought me the possibility to dissolve borders. Whatever name you want to give, trans, enter, and for me, the best, the one I like the most, undisciplinary, is the space of this clashing between different intelligences. This is the definition of innovation, betting in spaces for the absolutely unexpected. And among this group of artists and disseminators, I can mention, because we became the fruit of this program. One of them in the high north part of Brazil, Jabas Jacobi, now also a teacher, but who created a real-time interactive systems for integrated audiovisual processing, named Vimos, and Alexandre Rangel in the center of Brazil, in Brasilia, who created a software for VJs named Quasi Cinema, which one of the version name is Feijoada, because of our food. And me, I create, for example, a replicable electronic device to communicate with plants, or Hybrida project, part of my master degree, and in between University of São Paulo and Universidad Autónoma de México, we created this huge experimental laboratory to prototype augmented bodies. And we did that with the help of dozens of extraordinary people, chemists, doctors, engineers, artists, architects, biologists, lots of people teaching each other, learning from each other, trying to find, disseminate and dissolve all those borders, being there. Because of the university and this project, I met Pedro Medeiros. I met Pedro at the university while I was doing my master degree. And Pedro was a big supporter of the HIBIDA project. He was also one of the founders of a group called Synthetic Biology Club, with whom we both participated in the iGEM competition. If you don't know what iGEM is, I will read a direct definition from them. The iGEM competition is an annual worldwide synthetic biology event aimed at undergraduate university students as well as high school and graduate students. Multidisciplinary teams work together to design, build, test, and measure a system of their own design using interchangeable biological parts and standard molecular biology techniques. Well, the engineering of a biological system, this is the central goal. It's a mix between engineering and the biology part, where the teams, they need to deliver a very comprehensive project, including both the project and detailed documentation about it. All has to be replicable, verifiable, and proofing, just like good science should be. This is the interesting part of the competition. It's building this collective knowledge about synthetic biology. It is also required for the teams to have what they call human practices. It is kind of an open statement, but there is where the teams are required to think creatively about whether the project is responsible and good for the world or not. What should be. The introduction of this way of operating in science brought some paradigm shifts, like the insertion of people into laboratory practice, people like me, where the laboratory was delegated to specialists and advanced students. The intellectual independence of a student and the insertion of the human practices into scientific research, helping to bring questioning and social participation into the project. Are those humans asking those weird, bothering questions about the implication of the technology you're creating into the world? Yep, that was what human practice should be and should be intertwined with the project. And iGEM is also an innovation in the sense of bringing this thinking of engineering into biology, which connect us directly with open source. Open source is a two-way access idea. As Pixel mentioned before, many people doing what many people have defined. And within the Brazilian context, it means a gigantic change, bringing legal and participative access in the face of a world where development has always been all about something that it's not there, usually from the north, but not there. Previously, we did had some kinds of access, but that was through piracy, which means an illegal way, and there was a point where you had to stop. And I will quote Pedro here for you to understand it better. That was a symbolic feeling of the time has come. The South can participate, not only adapting what comes from outside, but interfering in it. The possibility to be more than a consumer that brought a very powerful sense of inclusion and empowerment and legality. Although the relationship of use within open source is much greater than relationship of contribution, we know that, having the possibility to do so changed the relationship. But unlike software, however, where the replica is in a clone of a command line or a push of a button, a biology project depends on very expensive materials. Machinery, instrument, fluids, life types. It needs other humans. It's harder to do it alone. And it depends on a whole environment built for that. The collaborative relationship becomes necessary not only on how to do, but how to make it possible. This is also why an idea is interesting in iGEM can have feedback that accentuates the difference between North and South and problematize what open means. Open access for whom? First, for those who can afford the huge participation fees based in dollars. If you see the currency evaluation, dollars are high, really above usually the southern currencies. That's not the only barrier, there's many. One is the language, the access itself to the university, the access to be able to travel to the competitions where visa can be a really huge barrier, besides of the paying for the ticket and the time to go. It is very common in Latin America and the southern part of the world that you have to study together with working. You'd never just study from high school on. It is a very luxury for very few to be able to only study. As as the study is just only for anyone who have been into academia before. And time becomes a factor that excludes the openness. From this point of view, it doesn't seem that open, does it? That is why partnerships with other sectors, like the important work Pixel have done together with the government, applying and having proper public policies become so important. And in the case of science and in the case of being able to participate in the iGEM, the connection with the private sectors become fundamental. Paulo Shore. About the same time, I joined a group that brings this philosophy in the health area. The same time that it was in iGEM, doing the master and everything come together, I met also this person, Paulo Shore. Founded by one of the founders of a group called MedHacker, which I'm part of it, which is an innovation group within São Paulo Medical School. It is literally a space inside of the ophthalmology lab that brought together doctors, engineers, artists, designers, philosophers, and many other human beings with a deep desire to open healthcare and health practices. The understanding that health is a sector that should be cared for and maintained as a common good, since no matter who you are, I mean, you can do whatever. You can go through your whole life without legal issues, without, I don't know how, but without touching a software or a computer, but you will need. And doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you will need to care of your health and the use of medicine at some point. Initially focus on impact rather than in the interest and on the relationship between doctor-patient. The group, the MedHacker, brought lots of innovation to the medical sector and the academia that forms those doctors. Where in Brazil, research and application, they do not come together. Like iGEM, MedHacker is also created from the union between the engineering thought applied to medicine and from the union between research and application. But sure, this special human being goes further. He escapes from the theoretical approach by pursuing activism in both senses, as the act of doing and the political act behind of it, by claiming structural changes and the improvement of life. This is what this group is about. Shore has did like his university about in the 80s, 90s, and by this historical understanding, he understands the enormous paradigm change from the simple act that is thinking and acting together, which is still true today, unfortunately. Medicine back then and now is a synonymous of assistance. You need to assist a patient. If you want to do research, that's a separate topic. And it's also about one direction. It's never a bidirectional relationship. It is this pursuit of an understanding of the need of co-creating that keeps the MedHacker going. And it is from the constant juggling that the team has been asking itself how to co-create, to open, to change the proposition of medicine from the vision of disease to health, to find sustainability in the appropriation of this good that should belong to all and be for all. Inspired by the free software movement, many areas, we had many attempts. Proposition of open registry, open patents, open licenses, several hackathons of innovation to have products that could be replicated, and proper documentation to have this replication. Most of all, the core idea of collaboration and interdisciplinarity. Quoting Shore, complex is not a problem that requires laboratory development. It is not creating the pill. Complexity is getting into people's heads so that they follow the treatment, is enabling the co-development where the patient can be part of their health. That is where the real change lives. Open Source Program Office. Up until before I moved to Berlin, my view of open source was from the perspective of the user and the communities around the projects, just like this project I mentioned. I realized that many of the projects I created or helped lacked sustainability. And I also personally needed more sustainability in my life as I have been living as an artist and optimism engaged in only collaborative process. This is why I became a developer, to find the sustainability. My career in technology, curiously or by destiny, if you might, started in an open source program office that was recently created in Sauce Labs, where I'm still working at. Not in the program office, but in Sauce Labs. And back then, the team has been created by two also extraordinary human beings, Christian Broman and Diego Molina, who taught me a lot about the maintainer and the business perspective, which is a possibility to provide sustainability to the open source ecosystem. If you don't know what an open source program office means, I read this part of an article I found at the opensource.com, written by a Bitergia CEO, Manrique Lopez de la Fuente. Companies create open source program office to manage their relationship with the open source ecosystem they depend on. By understanding the company's open source ecosystem, OSPO is able to maximize the company's return of investment and reduce the risk of consuming, contributing to, and releasing open source software. Additionally, since the company depends on its open source system, ensuring its health and sustainability shall ensure the company's health, sustainable growth, and evolution. And I must confess that my FOSS heart is a bit bothered by the business language, but the proposition is real. A real alternative to find sustainability for projects that today are not marginal, but absolutely necessary for the software industry that dominates the world and our social relations. And if you want to know more about it, I highly recommend you to be part of the To-Do group. They have an open Slack channel, and they do an amazing job in creating and strengthening the model inside of companies and creating allies and sharing the information on how to. Practically speaking, the job of an open source program office is to negotiate, to be this intermediary between the project communities and the business that uses these projects. This includes the early times open source dream of living out of open source. The most direct way is to hire a full-time project maintainer so that they can strengthen and improve the projects full-time as a full-time job. But more sophisticated forms can include long-term strategic plans for mutual collaboration between companies and projects. Is it easy to do that so? Absolutely not. But it is a model based on an alliance between civil and private society that points to the current needs with a possible solution. Now the big question, where do we go from here? What do I do with this knowledge? Well, I believe the examples I gave are very positive, right? They are from an optimistic time, and I did on purpose did that cut for the optimistic part. But this is not the case today, where the rise of authoritarian regimes that reinforce a social division goes against the logic of openness and collaboration. These examples do not attempt to return to a nostalgic epoch. I would like them to serve as a reference of possibilities where we can walk and reinvent ourselves. Building on and standing on the shoulder of giants, isn't that the open source motto? It is necessary to look both at the possibilities and where it failed. A model that depends on collective, where individuals are massacred by an individualistic system, is confrontational and relegated to the hobby of those who can afford the luxuries of free time. On the other hand, our vision is very narrowed when we can only see the Olympus of the demigods model. The myth of the guy who created things in the garage and became the billionaire businessman has invaded our thinking. And with that, we offer models that we call open when they are sandbox, where the use is open for consumption of the collective intelligence and the benefit of a few. What models, standards, possibilities can we collectively create where the benefit is truly mutual, inclusive, diverse, and equitable? Where the true power of open can bridge the gap of access, where we harness collective intelligence for the common good, raising the base? All these examples show me the core condensed in pixels phrase on how much this matters. It is necessary that many define what many execute. Open and plural participation. So open source should not only be about using the outputs of that many, but about the two-way decision making and execution so that the collective intelligence can be exercised. But this is not magic. And it is, as Shor said, the question of not $1 but $2 million. And that I bring in the form of question for you today. Open source is not what it used to be, and it is necessary to understand how it affects not only your code, but the lives around it. It is necessary to understand its power, but also where it fails to find sustainability. I leave the question open, hoping to be able to weave together a more open, democratic, conscious, and sustainable future for us all. Thank you very much.